Australians are being urged to help support a new charity push to help starving families in Somalia. At least 8 malnourished children have died in the capital, Mogadishu, in the past 24 hours alone. Severe drought has brought the country to the brink of famine, and thousands of families are on the move in search of food, water and shelter. In a moment, we'll be joined by the Australian representative of the UN Refugee Agency, who's about to head overseas to see it for herself. But first, the latest on this terrible situation.
In Somalia, the rains have failed, crops and animals have died, and now the children are dying too. This is just one of over 2,700 under-5s admitted to emergency feeding centres in the capital Mogadishu in the past month. Mogadishu is a war zone, with these African Union forces defending it from Islamist militants. And yet the land beyond this battle-scarred capital is so parched that refugees are crossing this front line, seeking sanctuary within. Feeding centres in the city, funded by the UN and Oxfam, are overwhelmed. Mukhtar Ali Mohammed says he walked for 50 miles through the bush to evade the Islamists, but that he'd left his children behind with nothing to eat or drink. Somalia isn't on the verge of famine. Aid agencies say parts of the south have now tipped over the edge. Tens of thousands are fleeing the worst regional drought since the 1950s, fleeing across the border to Kenya or Ethiopia, with the UN claiming that over 2 million Somalis are now at risk.
I have no doubt that Somalia is today the worst humanitarian disaster that we face in the world.
More than half the Somali children arriving in Ethiopia are seriously malnourished. Amid the windswept refugee camps of northern Kenya, the figure is slightly better, at up to 40%, though untold numbers have died on the way here. But these pictures from Mogadishu show children close to starvation, and who knows how many more in the countryside never get as far as this.
It's enough to bring a tear to your eye, isn't it? With more about this distressing situation in Somalia, I'm joined in the studio by Naomi Steer, who's the National Director in Australia for the UN Refugee Agency. Naomi, terrible pictures there. You're going in and will actually see this firsthand next week. What's your mission?
Yeah, they are very distressing pictures, Ron, and we're being told that in the Horn of Africa there are about 10 million people affected overall by a drought. But in Somalia, where I'm going, it's not only the drought, but of course it's the conflict that is creating many problems and a huge shortage of food in that country. I'm going to a place called Galkayo, which is in central Somalia. A little bit more security than Mogadishu, which we've just seen some of those images. But Australia for UNHCR has been funding a hospital there, the only functioning maternal health hospital in all of Somalia. And around the hospital there are, as I understand, many thousands of internally displaced people now. And part of my mission is to assess the situation of those people who are trapped inside Somalia right now.
We often see that things like drought, as is going on here, are greatly exacerbated by what you're saying, the political difficulties in this country. Yet you seem to be having some success there at the moment. How do you work around all those influences that are trying to control parts of the country in this really horrible way?
Well, I think for all aid agencies, Somalia is one of the most difficult places, certainly, to work in, both in terms of access and security. But you look for those windows of opportunity, and that's what we have had through this hospital. There, we can get support in there. We've been funding health programs there for some years now. There are tremendously dedicated staff of Somalian health workers who have stayed in Somalia at risk to themselves. And it's those kind of, I guess, openings that you look for. That being said, aid agencies, including UNHCR, has called on the warring clans in Somalia to open up access to aid agencies right now across the board, so that aid agencies can start delivering much more food assistance, which is, as I understand, the number one need in Somalia right now.
With respect, given that the situation's as bad as it is, will they pay any heed to anything you say?
I think when you're looking at over 50% of children suffering from acute malnutrition, which is what we're being told now, children arriving in the refugee camps on the other side of the border, of course, which we have far greater access to, very, very high levels of malnutrition, and that's of the families who've made it out. So what's happening to the families in Somalia? So I think unless you're looking at the total collapse of a country, total collapse of humanity, I think we can only really plead that humanitarian principles will apply.
You mentioned there about the movement of people across borders, and that is a huge difficulty in Africa. You've got southern and northern Sudan as another example going on at the moment. But you have these huge mounds of population, hundreds of thousands of people moving across borders. That must put tremendous strains on the few reserves that are already in those countries.
Yes, and that's absolutely right. Dadaab refugee camp, which I've visited a number of times, which is on the Somalian-Kenyan border, was already busting at the seams with 300,000 people. It is now receiving 1,400 people a day extra who are coming into that camp. In Ethiopia, it's a similar story. 1,700 people a day streaming into a country that's resources are already stretched. That being said, we see time and time again in these situations, if we can put the resources in and we can put them in quickly, we can make a positive change. So if we can get the nutritional food in, if we can get the shelter in, if we can truck the water in, we will be saving lives.
I think we tend to think of that as a problem being way over there, that there's not much we can do. How do we help? We're going to put your website up here to see how people can get in touch as well.
Thank you very much. Well, our aid agency and a number of agencies in Australia are calling on Australians to give, to provide basic things for water, to provide basic things like nutritional feeding kits, to provide basic things like blankets, to provide basic things like plastic sheeting. When people arrive, it's very hot at the moment, and there's absolutely no shelter. So through giving small donations, but if all of us contribute to that, we can really help people in this desperate situation.
All right, good luck in your mission. I hope it's a great success. Naomi Steer from the UNHCR joining us here live in the studio. Thank you.